Every morning, somewhere between the first sip of coffee and the last bite of toast, something happens inside you that decides how the rest of your day is going to feel. Not your mood, not your energy, your gut. And after 60, that decision gets made a lot more easily than it used to. Here's the number I want you to sit with for a second. Roughly 1 in 3 adults over 60 deals with regular constipation. Not occasionally, regularly. Bloating, sluggishness, that heavy off feeling an hour after breakfast that you've quietly decided is just getting older. Reflux that wasn't there in your 40s. A stomach that used to handle anything and now seems to object to things it never used to notice. You didn't do anything dramatic to cause that. That's the part I really want you to hear. It's rarely one bad meal or one wild indulgence. It's almost always something small and repeated, a habit so ordinary you'd never think to question it, done every single morning at the exact moment your digestive system is least equipped to absorb it. I'm Dr. Seo. I've spent more than 15 years in internal medicine and nutritional biochemistry, which is really just the science of what food and the way we eat it does to the body at the cellular level, hour by hour, decade by decade. And in that time, I have sat across from more patients than I can count who did everything right by the old rules, cut the butter, watched the salt, took their walks, and still couldn't figure out why their stomach felt like it was fighting them every morning. Almost every time, the answer wasn't hiding in what was on the plate. It was hiding in the habit around the plate. So today I'm walking you through 6 of the most common breakfast habits that quietly damage digestion after 60. And I mean that specifically, not as a scare word. I'll tell you exactly what's happening inside your gut when each one plays out, and exactly what to do instead starting tomorrow morning. Stay with me all the way to the 6th one because it's the one that surprises almost everyone I explain it to. It has almost nothing to do with what you're eating and everything to do with what you're doing while you eat it. If you only watch one part of this video, that's the one I'd ask you not to skip. And before we go further, I'm not here to sell you a supplement, a cleanse, or a course. I don't have one. What I have is the research and 15 years of watching what actually helps real people. That's it. Let me give you the 60 seconds of biology that makes everything after this land the way it should, because once you understand what's actually changing inside your gut after 60, these habits stop looking random and start looking like a pattern. 3 things shift quietly as we age. First, stomach acid production. Somewhere around a third of adults over 65 produce meaningfully less stomach acid than they did at 40, a condition called hypochlorhydria. That acid isn't just there to make you uncomfortable when there's too little of it. It's there to break down protein, to release the minerals locked inside your food, and to kill off bacteria that shouldn't be surviving the trip through your stomach. Less acid means food sits there longer, half processed, and minerals like B12 and iron become harder to absorb, which is exactly why B12 deficiency becomes so much more common in this decade of life. Second, motility. The wave-like muscle contractions that push food through your digestive tract slows down. Not dramatically, but enough that food that used to move through in a day can now take noticeably longer, which is a huge part of why constipation becomes so common after 60. And third, this one gets almost no attention, your gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your intestines that help you digest fiber, regulate inflammation, and even influence your mood, becomes measurably less diverse with age. A less diverse microbiome is a less resilient one. It has a harder time bouncing back from a rough meal, a course of antibiotics, or a stretch of stress. Slower acid, slower motility. A thinner, less resilient microbiome. Hold on to those 3 because you're going to see at least one of them show up in every single habit on this list. And here's the one idea I want you to carry through the whole video, because it reframes almost everything people get wrong about digestion after 60. Most advice about gut health is about what you eat: more fiber, less fried food, fewer processed carbs. All true, all useful. But after 60, the bigger and far more overlooked variable isn't what you eat. It's the state your body is in when you eat it. A stomach with low acid, slow motility, and a fragile microbiome doesn't just need better food. It needs the right conditions, the right timing, the right pace, the right nervous system state to actually use that food well. You can eat a perfect breakfast and still wreck your digestion if you eat it the wrong way. Keep that in mind. It's going to come up again and again. Let's start the list. Number 1, and I promise you, most people watching this do it before they've even opened the curtains, is drinking coffee on a completely empty stomach first thing in the morning before any food has touched your system. I know what some of you are thinking. Coffee has been studied extensively, And in moderate amounts, it's actually linked to some real benefits, lower risk of certain liver conditions, some cognitive protective effects. I'm not telling you to give up coffee. I'm telling you when you drink, it matters more after 60 than it did before. Here's the mechanism. Coffee is acidic, and it also stimulates the stomach to produce more of its own acid, gastrin, the hormone that triggers acid release, rises within minutes of that first sip. If your stomach is already running low on protective mucus lining, which naturally thins with age, and there's no food in there to buffer that acid, you're pouring an acid-stimulating drink directly onto an unprotected stomach wall. For some people, that shows up as heartburn. For others, it's a dull ache or that coffee stomach feeling you've maybe learned to just accept. And because the lower esophageal sphincter, the valve that's supposed to keep stomach contents from splashing back up into your esophagus, also weakens somewhat with age, that acid has an easier path upward than it used to. That's a big part of why reflux becomes so much more common in this decade of life, and coffee on empty stomach is one of the most common daily contributors I see. So what should you do instead? You don't have to give up your coffee. Just don't let it be the first thing that hits your stomach. Even a few bites of something first, a boiled egg, some yogurt, a piece of toast, gives your stomach lining something to buffer against, and it takes less than 5 minutes. If you're someone who genuinely can't function without that first sip before you've eaten anything, at minimum have a full glass of water alongside it to dilute the acidity. Small change, real difference. Number 2 is one that a lot of well-meaning people actually think is the healthy choice. Skipping breakfast altogether, then eating your first real meal of the day around noon. Here's why it belongs on this list. Intermittent fasting has genuine research behind it for certain people and certain goals. I'm not dismissing that body of evidence, but there's a difference between a structured, moderate fasting window and what actually happens for a lot of people over 60, which is black coffee at 6, nothing until a large lunch at 1, because mornings feel rushed or appetite just isn't there the way it used to be. That's not intentional fasting. That's an accidental 12 to 14-hour gap, followed by a big meal hitting a slower system all at once. Remember what I told you about motility slowing with age? When you go that long without eating, your gastrointestinal tract essentially goes quiet, and then a large meal arrives and has to restart the whole system from a standstill, asking a slower gut to process a bigger volume of food in one sitting than it would if that same food had been spread out. That's a common recipe for the bloating and heaviness a lot of my patients describe after their first meal of the day, because it isn't really breakfast anymore. It's playing catch-up. There's also a blood sugar piece here. A bigger, later first meal tends to produce a sharper glucose spike than the same calories eaten earlier, and more gradually. And after 60, insulin sensitivity is already something your body is managing more carefully than it did at 30. The fix isn't you must eat breakfast the second you wake up. It's simpler than that. Don't let your first bite of the day be your biggest bite of the day. If mornings genuinely aren't hungry hours for you, that's fine, but give your gut something small within a couple of hours of waking. A handful of nuts, half a banana, a small bowl of plain yogurt. You're not forcing a big meal. You're just telling your digestive system gently that it's time to wake up too. Number 3, and I want you to really sit with this one because it's marketed as one of the healthiest things you can put on your breakfast table, a large glass of fruit juice, most often orange juice, alongside your meal. Here's why it earns a spot on this list. A single 8-ounce glass of orange juice can carry over 20 grams of sugar, comparable to some regular sodas, but without the fiber that whole fruit gives you to slow that sugar's absorption. When you drink that sugar, instead of eating it inside the fiber matrix of an actual orange, it hits your bloodstream fast, and after 60, when insulin sensitivity is already declining for most people, that spike and crash pattern is harder on your system than it used to be. But the part that's specifically about digestion, not just blood sugar, is what that concentrated fructose load does to your gut bacteria. Research on the gut microbiome has consistently shown that high fructose intake, especially from juice rather than whole fruit, can shift the balance of your gut bacteria in ways associated with more inflammation and less microbial diversity, exactly the fragile microbiome problem I mentioned earlier, made worse rather than better. I want to be precise here because this is a place where it's easy to overstate things. Orange juice isn't dangerous, it's not toxic. It has real vitamin C and potassium in it. The issue is specifically the habit of a large glass of it, daily as a stand-in for whole fruit on top of an already carbohydrate-heavy breakfast. So what do? If you love the citrus, have the actual orange. You get the same vitamin C plus close to 3 grams of fiber that slows the sugar absorption and actually feeds the good bacteria in your gut rather than disrupting them. If juice is truly part of your morning ritual and you're not willing to give it up, cut the portion to 4 ounces and never drink it on its own. Pair it with protein or fat, which slows how fast that sugar hits your bloodstream. Now, before we get to numbers 4 and 5, because these are the two I find people get the most wrong, the ones they'd swear on their life are the healthy choice. Let me ask you something. Which one on this list so far has been your habit? Tell me in the comments because I read every one of them and it genuinely shapes what I cover next. And if you want more of this real sourced information about what's actually happening inside your body after 60, not fear, not sales pitches, that's exactly what this channel is for. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Number 4 is the bowl of cereal that has heart healthy or high fiber printed right on the box. Here's why this one is sneaky. A lot of popular breakfast cereals are marketed almost entirely around what they don't have, low fat, low cholesterol, while quietly being built from refined grains that have had most of their natural fiber stripped out during processing, then had a small amount of synthetic fiber or a few added vitamins put back in so the label can make a health claim. The ingredient list matters more than the front of the box. Some popular healthy cereals contain less than 3 grams of fiber per serving, a fraction of what your gut actually needs. Why does that matter specifically for digestion after 60? The dietary guidelines for Americans recommend somewhere around 25 to 30 grams of fiber a day for most adults, and the majority of Americans over 60 get well under half of that. Fiber is what gives your slower aging gut something to actually work with. It adds bulk that helps motility keep moving. It feeds the beneficial bacteria that are already struggling with reduced diversity. And it's one of the single most effective, well-documented tools for preventing the constipation that affects roughly a third of older adults. A refined cereal, even a healthy one, quietly starves your gut of exactly the ingredient it needs most, first thing every single morning for years. The swap here doesn't mean giving up cereal. Look for one with at least 5 grams of fiber per serving and whole grains listed as the first ingredient, not enriched wheat flour. Or take 5 minutes to make steel-cut oats instead of instant. Steel-cut oats retain far more of their fiber structure and digest more slowly, which is gentler on a system that's already processing things more slowly than it used to. And this is a place where a Korean approach genuinely earns its spot rather than just being decoration. A small bowl of plain rice with vegetables, or a warm bowl of doenjang jjigae, a fermented soybean paste stew, gives you fiber from the vegetables, and in the case of doenjang, some of the same fermentation-derived compounds that support gut bacteria diversity, without ever having gone through a factory process that strips the fiber out in the first place. I'll say plainly, though, because I don't want you to hear Korean and assume automatically safer, doenjang and other fermented pastes can be high in sodium, so if you're watching your blood pressure, a small portion is the move, not a large bowl. Number 5 is one I see constantly, and it has nothing to do with what's on your plate, it's how fast you're clearing it. Eating quickly without properly chewing, especially at breakfast when most of us are rushing to get somewhere or just eager to start the day. Here's the mechanism, and it starts before food even reaches your stomach. Digestion begins in your mouth. Chewing physically breaks food down and mixes it with saliva, which contains an enzyme called amylase that starts breaking down starches immediately before your stomach ever sees them. When you chew properly, you're doing a meaningful chunk of your stomach's job for it in advance. When you swallow large, barely chewed pieces of food, your stomach, which, remember, may already be running on less acid than it used to produce, has to work harder to break down bigger particles with a weaker tool. That's a common recipe for the bloating, gas, and that heavy feeling people often blame entirely on what they ate, when the real issue was how fast they ate it. There's a second piece here, too. Eating quickly tends to mean swallowing more air along with your food, which is one of the most common, most overlooked causes of bloating and gas. Not a food intolerance, not a sensitive stomach, just air swallowed too fast with too little chewing. The fix costs you nothing and takes about 5 extra minutes. Chew each bite noticeably more than feels necessary. A lot of gastroenterologists suggest aiming for something in the range of 20 to 30 chews for solid food, which sounds like a lot until you actually try it and realize most of us are doing closer to 5 or 6. Put your fork down between bites if you need a physical reminder. And this is a small thing, but it matters. Try not to eat standing at the counter while you're doing three other things. Sit down. Even 5 unhurried minutes changes how well that meal gets processed. Now, the sixth one, this is the one I told you at the start almost nobody expects, and once I explain it, you're going to start noticing it in your own mornings almost immediately. It's eating breakfast while you're stressed, distracted, or scrolling through your phone, the news, email, whatever it is, rather than actually being present for the meal. I know that sounds like it belongs on a mindfulness channel, not a video about digestion. Stay with me because the physiology here is completely real, and it's honestly one of the most under-discussed pieces of gut health at any age, let alone after 60. Your digestive system is largely run by what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes described as your rest and digest state. When you're calm, your body sends more blood flow to your gut, releases more digestive enzymes, and moves food through your system efficiently. But the moment you're stressed, anxious, or even just mentally keyed up, reading upsetting news, rushing to answer an email, arguing with someone in your head, your body shifts toward the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight state. And one of the very first things that state does is divert blood flow and resources away from digestion and toward your muscles and your alertness, because biologically, your body thinks something more urgent than breakfast is happening. There's even a well-documented physiological phenomenon called the cephalic phase of digestion. Your body actually begins preparing to digest food, releasing saliva and the first wave of stomach acid in response to the sight, smell, and anticipation of a meal before you've taken a single bite. It's one of the reasons a meal you're relaxed and attentive for tends to digest more smoothly than one eaten while distracted. Your body never got the calm, focused signal to properly ramp up in the first place. Layer that onto a gut that after 60 already has less acid, slower motility, and a more fragile microbiome, and you have a system that needed every advantage it could get, and instead got the exact opposite every single morning for years without you ever once suspecting your phone had anything to do with your stomach. This is why some of the exact same patients who came to me, convinced their stomach couldn't handle certain foods anymore, found real improvement not from changing a single ingredient, but from changing how they ate, sitting down, putting the phone away, taking even 3 or 4 slow breaths before the first bite. I'm not telling you meditation cures indigestion. I'm telling you the state of your nervous system while you eat is a real physiological variable in how well that meal gets digested, and it's the one variable almost nobody puts on their gut health checklist because it doesn't come in a bowl. So what do you actually do? You don't need 20 minutes of silent breakfast meditation. Put the phone somewhere you can't see it for the 10 or 15 minutes it takes to eat. If the news genuinely stresses you, save it for after the meal, not during. And if mornings are rushed for you, and for most people they are, even 60 seconds of just sitting still before the first bite with nothing in your hands gives your parasympathetic system a chance to actually take the wheel before food arrives. You cannot see this one happening. You cannot feel it directly the way you'd feel heartburn from coffee. But it's happening quietly every single morning, shaping how well every other habit on this list actually works. I want to bring this back to the one idea I asked you to hold on to at the start, because now you can see exactly how it played out 6 different ways. This was never really a list about 6 different foods and habits. It was one idea told 6 times after 60. Digestion isn't only about what you eat. It's about the condition your body is in when you eat it. The coffee wasn't the enemy, the empty, unbuffered stomach was. The orange juice wasn't poison, the missing fiber was. The cereal wasn't bad because it was cereal. It was bad because it had been stripped of the one thing your gut needed most. And the phone in your hand wasn't hurting your stomach directly. It was pulling your nervous system out of the exact state your gut needed to do its job well. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Margaret. 68, retired, managing mild hypertension with medication, and she'd been living with what she called just a difficult stomach for close to 3 years, bloating most days, constipation more mornings than not, and a growing list of foods she quietly decided she couldn't handle anymore. Eggs bothered her, bread bothered her. She'd started skipping breakfast most days entirely because eating first thing seemed to make things worse. And when she did eat, it was usually cereal and orange juice, standing at the kitchen counter, catching up on the news on her tablet before her daughter called. We didn't change a single one of her medications. We didn't put her on any restrictive diet. What we changed was almost embarrassingly simple. She started eating a small handful of nuts and a few bites of yogurt within an hour or two of waking, instead of nothing. She swapped the cereal for steel-cut oats with berries. She moved her orange juice to an actual orange, eaten slowly, alongside her breakfast rather than instead of proper food. And this was the part she resisted the most, and the part that ended up mattering the most. She agreed to leave the tablet in another room for the 15 minutes it took to eat. Within about 3 weeks, she told me something I still think about. She said it didn't feel like she'd given anything up. It felt like she'd finally started giving her stomach a fair chance in the morning instead of ambushing it. Her bloating became occasional instead of daily. The constipation that had been a near-constant background hum for years became genuinely rare. And she told me almost sheepishly that eggs and bread turned out to be fine all along. They'd never really been the problem. That's not a rare story in my experience. It's closer to the rule than the exception. Most of the time, the gut isn't broken. It's just been asked to work under the worst possible conditions morning after morning for years, and nobody ever told the person why. Now, I want to be honest with you about where this advice ends, because a responsible doctor tells you that too, not just the parts that make for a good list. If you have a diagnosed digestive condition, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, chronic acid reflux that's already being managed with medication, or anything involving your gallbladder or pancreas, these general habits are a reasonable foundation, but they are not a substitute for the specific plan your gastroenterologist has already built for you. Please don't stop or adjust a prescribed reflux medication, a proton pump inhibitor, or anything else your doctor has you on because of something in this video. If anything here makes you curious about a change, that's a conversation to bring to your physician, not a decision to make alone. If you're on blood thinners like warfarin, be aware that suddenly and dramatically increasing your fiber and leafy vegetable intake can shift your vitamin K levels enough to matter for your INR. The blood test that measures how your blood thinner is working. That's not a reason to avoid vegetables. It's a reason to make dietary changes gradually and mention them at your next appointment, so your levels can be monitored appropriately. And if constipation, bloating, or reflux has been a genuinely new or worsening problem for you, not a lifelong quirk, but something that's shown up or gotten noticeably worse recently, please don't let a video like this one be the reason you wait instead of getting it checked. New digestive symptoms after 60 are worth a real conversation with your doctor, sometimes with straightforward testing, just to rule out anything that needs more than a breakfast change. Everything I've told you here is educational information based on published research, not personalized medical advice, and it isn't a replacement for your own physician or a registered dietitian, especially if you're managing an existing condition. Let's bring it all together, because I want you to leave here with something you can actually use tomorrow morning, not just a list you half remember. Coffee on an empty stomach? Have a few bites of food first so your stomach has something to buffer against. Skipping breakfast and eating a large, late first meal. Give your gut something small within a couple of hours of waking so it isn't restarting from a dead stop. A big glass of fruit juice. Reach for the whole fruit instead, for the fiber that slows the sugar and feeds your gut bacteria. Refined, low-fiber cereal, check the label for at least 5 grams of fiber, or swap in steel-cut oats. Eating too fast without chewing properly. Slow down. Chew more than feels necessary. Sit down for the meal. And eating while stressed or distracted, give your body those first calm minutes it needs to actually shift into digestion mode. If you only change one thing starting tomorrow, make it the last one. It costs nothing, it takes no extra time, and in my experience, it's the one that quietly amplifies every other good choice you make. This was never really about fear. It's food chemistry and it's nervous system physiology, and it's the simple truth that after 60, your gut deserves the same fair conditions it always did. You just have to be the one who gives them to it. I genuinely like to know which of these 6 surprised you the most. Was it the coffee, the juice, or the phone at the table? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and it helps me know exactly what to cover next. If someone in your life eats breakfast standing up, scrolling, rushing out the door, this takes 10 seconds to share, and it might be exactly the nudge they need. And if you want more of this real sourced information about what's actually happening inside your body as you age, never fear. Never a sales pitch. Subscribe. Because next week I'm looking at 5 everyday drinks that are quietly raising blood pressure in people who have no idea it's happening. I'll see you there.